From I know you're in your home there in Oshkosh. So, Senator, welcome back to Meet the Press. Let me just start with your reaction to what the president tweeted about Ambassador YOVANOVITCH on Friday.
Good morning, Chuck. Well, I thought it was kind of interesting when President Trump was leaving the White House, going to Atlanta, and people were talking about his behavior. He said, my behavior is caused by you. The constant torment. I mean, the investigation. So, listen, I would prefer he not provide that type of tweet. But, my concern, and let me start out with something else here, Chuck, because I don't want to argue every point. Something we agree on. As Americans, we all share the same goal. We want a safe, prosperous, secure America. We're compassionate. We care about each other. And generally, we solve our political differences at the ballot box, right, not in the streets or through impeachment. And I think that is really, as we talked the other day, that's the divide that is tearing this country apart. And that's what I'm primarily concerned about.
I want to get into a little bit of the specifics. So I want to get you to react to something that the ambassador said particularly about what Rudy Giuliani was doing. Take a listen to her testimony.
I obviously don't dispute that the president has the right to withdraw an ambassador at any time for any reason. But what I do wonder is why it was necessary to smear my reputation.
It's a fair question for her to ask.
Sure it is. And again, I have no problem with the ambassador. She hosted me when I was made one of my trips over there. But, one thing I want to point out is the damage that is being done to our country through this entire impeachment process. It's going to be very difficult for future presidents to have a kind of conversation with the world leader, because now we've set the precedent of leaking transcripts. It's good, the weakening of executive privilege is not good. And by the way, those individuals that leaked this, if their interest was a stronger relationship with Ukraine, they didn't accomplish this. Having this all come out into public has weakened that relationship, has exposed things that didn't need to be exposed. When I was in Ukraine with Senator Murphy, one of the points I was trying to make is, as we left that meeting, let's try and minimize this. Let's talk about this as a timing difference in terms of funding. Senator Murphy's on the Appropriations Committee. We will restore the funding. I came back and I talked to Senator Durbin. He offered an amendment. That same day, the funding was released. So this would have been far better off if we would have just taken care of this behind the scenes. We have two branches of government.
Okay.
Most people wanted to support Ukraine. We were trying to convince President Trump. And so I listened to the Washington Post article lionizing this whistleblower. Listen, if the whistleblower's goal is to improve our relationship with Ukraine, he utterly failed. And consider that's part of. Go ahead.
Let me pick up on what you said there about all this going public, because you actually raised an interesting question about this. Why was the president so insistent that President Zelensky had to be public about announcing an investigation? And I ask that because, one of the foundations of due process in this country is actually not to publicly announce who you're investigating, because you may be investigating somebody who's innocent. And yet the president wanted Ukraine to violate one of our great protections in the rule of law and publicly announce an investigation regardless of whether there's guilt or not. Why did he want to go public?
I'm not sure that's the case. I certainly understand that President Trump wanted to find out what was happening in 2016 and how did this false narrative about Russian inclusion with his campaign occur. That I know, because that's from my firsthand testimony. What I also know is when I sprung that on President Trump in my August 31st phone call, he completely denied there's any kind of arrangement that Ukraine had to do something before he'd release that funding. And this is what has not been reported from that phone call. At the tail end, it was a pretty long phone call. We talked about a bunch of other things, but at the very end, he wrapped it up by saying, Ron, I got a hurricane I have to deal with, but I hear what you're saying. We're reviewing this. I think you're going to like my decision. So he's already leaning toward providing that funding on August 31st. My guess is that if this never would have been exposed, that funding would have been restored, and our relationship with Ukraine would be far better off than it is today.
Again, you seem to say that you seem to blame this on everybody but the president. It was the president's actions.
I'm not blaming anybody, Chuck.
Well, you are. You're blaming everybody else for the reason we're in this situation other than the president's. Isn't the president's own behavior, which raised all of these yellow and red flags, isn't that why we're here?
Again, I'm sympathetic with President Trump as he's been tormented from the day after his election. quick little quote from the lawyer of the whistleblower. This is 10 days after his inauguration. Coup has started. First of many steps, rebellion. Impeachment will follow ultimately. Now, if this whistleblower was, to be lionized by the Washington Post, maybe we ought to take a look at, who he hired. He could have hired an unbiased officer of the court. Instead, he hired Mark Zayed, who said, coup has started, first of many steps, impeachment will follow ultimately. Now,
Senator,
again, that's not an unbiased officer of the court. So there's something going on here, Chuck. That's my point.
Well,
Something's going on in what's dividing this country.
Let me ask you this. Now, let me ask you this. You're the one that brought up this idea that impeachment was something that the left wanted to do immediately. I'm going to quote from you, sir. November 1st, 2016. You're asked about Hillary Clinton, and you said this: before the election, she purposely circumvented the law. This was willful concealment and destruction. I would say yes, high crime or misdemeanor. You were talking about impeachment before that election with Hillary Clinton. How should viewers not look at what you're doing here and you're just reacting as a partisan, that if Trump were a Democrat, you'd be ready to convict him?
First of all, understand that's before an election. I'm trying to hammer out the political differences before an election. And by the way, I completely agree with that. I mean, we've been investigating the whole Hillary Clinton email scandal, the exoneration of her. That was not an investigation to really dig out the truth. It was
so you think it was legit to advocate impeachment before the election? You're criticizing Democrats for advocating impeachment days after the inauguration.
You'd have to listen to the question. I don't think I said impeachment right there at all, Chuck. So again, no, I was just pointing out what Hillary Clinton had done, and I was hoping that people would not elect her, and they didn't. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons that she was not elected is what she did with that private server, which was completely intentional. I mean, it baffles me that she was not indicted, quite honestly. But now that we know, based on the struck page text, which I know I'm not supposed to bring up. Let me ask you this
last question.
But I mean, that's
about
that's
partisanship. Why shouldn't viewers assume that you're looking at President Trump through a Republican lens here, because you were already much tougher, ready to go to impeachment on Hillary Clinton with no evidence that anything that happened with that server somehow got into foreigners' hands, when we actually had evidence regarding what happened at the DNC?
So I guess what I suggest, Chuck, is I got a letter last night from Representative Jordan and Nunes asking for basically my telling of events. I'll be working on that today. So I will lay out what I know in terms of this. And
so are you going to testify?
To a certain extent, some of my perspective. Now, they're not going to call me, because certainly Adam and Schiff wouldn't want to be called by the Senate. There's going to be a separation there. But I think I will reply to that, and I'll supply my telling of events, which is difficult to do in 8 or 10 minutes on a show like this.
Fair enough.
But Chuck, going back to, we are a divided nation. I am highly concerned about that. I know you are as well. We need to start understanding the other person's perspective, and that's what's not happening right now.
Senator Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, thank you for coming on and sharing your views, sir. I appreciate it. Hello from Washington. I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe, and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.